You are standing at the mouth of a cave. The air outside is cold and smells of pine and wet stone. You don't have a word for what you are yet. Neither does anyone else. Behind you, your children are quiet for the first time all morning because something is standing 20 feet away that they have never seen before. It looks like you, almost. The body is shorter and far thicker than yours, built like a tree trunk wrapped in muscle and brown fur. The head sits forward on a neck that barely exists, with a brow ridge so heavy it casts a shadow over deep, dark eyes. The face is wide, the nose enormous, the jaw pulled forward into a space where no chin has shown up yet. A shaggy pelt is slung across one shoulder. The hands are huge. For a few seconds, nobody moves. Then it speaks, not words you can parse, but a low, breathy sound that your brain, against every odd, almost recognizes as language. For roughly 300,000 years, this was a real moment, not a thought experiment, not a movie scene, an actual encounter between your ancestors and another species of human who shared your planet, your continents, and in some measurable genetic sense, your family tree. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia from roughly 400,000 to about 40,000 years ago. They were not a side branch. They were the other version of us, walking the earth at the same time, hunting the same prey, breathing the same cold air. The old picture of a Neanderthal was wrong for a long time. In 1856, workers blasting limestone in the Neander Valley near Dusseldorf pulled a thick, strange-looking skeleton out of the rock. The first scientists to study it assumed they were looking at a diseased Cossack, a Mongolian horseman, or some kind of modern European who had spent too long in the cold. The name Neanderthal was coined in 1864 by William King, an Irish geologist, who proposed it was a separate, primitive species. For the next 150 years, popular culture ran with that picture, a hunched, grunting, half-apex brute. That picture was built mostly on a single old man. The original 1856 skeleton belonged to an arthritic individual with a hunched posture caused by disease, not evolution. Add in the natural bias of 19th-century scientists toward a clean ladder of progress leading straight to Europeans, and you get a cartoon that took decades to undo. The real Neanderthal, drawn from hundreds of skeletons and more recently ancient DNA, looks different. They were short, around 5'4" to 5'6" on average, but extremely muscular. Relative to their height, their bones were thicker than those of almost any modern human, with a ribcage shaped like a bell. Their shoulders were barrel-wide. Their forearms and hands were powerful. Their legs were shorter than ours, and their pelvis flared in a way that suggests a large gut for processing a heavily meat-based diet. This was a body built for short, violent bursts of power in cold environments, not for long-distance running. The skull is what people notice first. A long, low braincase, a pronounced brow ridge, a face that juts forward instead of tucking under a vertical forehead. A large nose, often described as pinched at the sides, but in life warmed and humidified freezing air before it hit the lungs. A receding chin. The brain inside was, on average, slightly larger than a modern human's, about 1,400 cubic centimeters versus roughly 1,350, but shaped differently, with a larger visual processing region at the back and a smaller parietal region involved in some forms of abstract thinking and social networking. They were watching the world very carefully. Whether they were imagining it the same way we do is still one of the great open questions in human evolution. Here is where the picture gets strange, because Neanderthals were not alone. We now know from ancient DNA recovered starting in 2010 by Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, that our ancestors met them, mated with them, and kept the evidence in every cell of your body right now. The story of how we figured that out is worth pausing on, because it is one of the most extraordinary technical achievements in modern science. In 1997, the same year the first Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA was sequenced, the field still assumed the two species had never produced children. Then in 2010, Pääbo's team published the first full Neanderthal nuclear genome, and the result was unmistakable. Every person of non-African descent alive today carries roughly 1.5 to 2.1% Neanderthal DNA. Africans carry less, but some too. The two populations met, more than once, over thousands of years, in multiple places across the Middle East and Eurasia. You are not a different species from a Neanderthal in the way a dog is from a wolf. You are more like a cousin who stayed in touch. The children of those encounters were fertile. Their descendants are walking around today. About 20% of the Neanderthal genome survives, scattered in fragments across modern humans, but no single individual carries most of it. What did it feel like to stand in front of one? We can't replay the moment, but we can stack what we know. Their senses were sharper in the dark than yours. The work of anthropologist John Hawkes and others on Neanderthal eye sockets suggests they had larger visual processing regions, an adaptation to low-light hunting in the long nights of Ice Age Europe. In a forest at dusk, you would have been at a disadvantage. Their hearing was tuned differently. A 2013 study by Eric Trinkhaus and colleagues found that the Neanderthal ear canal was shaped to pick up a narrower range of frequencies than yours, with a sweet spot around human speech frequencies, but with different emphasis. They may have sounded less like a low grunt and more like a clipped, breathy, high-pitched version of a language you almost understood. They would have smelled different. Modern humans carry a heavy mutation load in olfactory genes that Neanderthals did not have. Recent genetic work by the Salk Institute and others suggests that when the two populations interbred, the immune system flagged Neanderthal smell as foreign, possibly as a mild trigger for social avoidance. The flip side is that some Neanderthal smell receptor genes actually survived in modern human DNA, especially in people with Eurasian ancestry, possibly because they helped detect predators or rotting meat in cold climates. Their diet was heavier than yours. Stable isotope work by Michael Richards and others on Neanderthal bones from sites like Shanidar in Iraq and El Cedron in Spain shows a diet dominated by large mammals, mammoth, rhinoceros, horse, ibex, with very little plant food, almost no fish in most regions, and a heavy caloric reliance on cooked meat. They were apex predators, not scavengers, and they were extremely good at it. At the Marillac site in France, archaeologists found a single Neanderthal skeleton with healed fractures consistent with having been thrown by a large ungulate and trampled, clear evidence of close quarters, hunting of animals, many times their body weight. They were right-handed. Cut marks on stone tools and the way they shaped their hand axes show a population-wide preference for the right hand, which is also true of modern humans and tied to the same brain lateralization. If you threw a rock at them, they would have flinched the same way you would. They made complex tools. The Châtelperronian industry, found mainly in France and northern Spain between roughly 45,000 and 40,000 years ago, is a Neanderthal-associated toolkit that includes not just stone scrapers and points but bone awls, pierced animal teeth that may have been worn as pendants, and a compound tool that glues small flint points to wooden handles using a tar-like substance made from heated birch bark. For a long time, this was claimed to be evidence that Neanderthals were copying incoming modern humans. Recent dating work has pushed that interpretation to the edge. They may have invented it themselves. They controlled fire. Burned hearths at sites like Roc de Marseille in France and Balamer Cave in Spain show repeated, structured use of fire for cooking and warmth, with clear evidence of hearth maintenance. They didn't just steal fire from lightning strikes. They kept it going, generation to generation, in caves that were occupied for tens of thousands of years. They buried their dead. The original 1856 Neanderthal was a deliberate burial. So was the one at La Ferrassie in France in 1908. So were the ones at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, excavated by Ralph Solke starting in 1951. In 2015, a team led by William Rendu published evidence that the Neanderthal remains at La Chapelle aux Saints had been deliberately placed in a shallow grave, not just dropped into a natural depression. With Shanidar, the famous pollen trace Solke found around one skeleton was for decades interpreted as flower burial, evidence of ritual mourning. That reading has since been disputed as a possible burrowing bee artifact, but the basic fact remains. They returned bodies to the earth in a chosen posture, sometimes with grave goods. They cared for the sick. The most famous case is Shanidar one, an older male who survived multiple devastating injuries over many years. A withered right arm amputated at the elbow, a blinded left eye, a healed broken leg that left him with a permanent limp, and degenerative joint disease across most of his body. He could not have fed himself or defended himself alone. He was fed, protected, and survived for years after his last injury. Someone in his group decided repeatedly that he was worth keeping alive. If you had walked up to that group on a winter afternoon 60,000 years ago, what would you have seen? A small band, maybe 10 to 15 individuals, hunkered around a low fire at the back of a rock shelter, dressed in stitched hides, holding tools shaped for the next hunt. Children chasing each other between the legs of adults. An older man sitting slightly apart, missing an arm, watching everything with one working eye. A woman chewing a strip of dried meat while she sews. A few hunters returning empty-handed, not embarrassed, just tired. They would have looked at you the way you looked at them. Your strange, tall, narrow body, your weak chin, your strange, flat forehead, the way you held your fire, the way you gestured with your hands, your smell. They had seen bands like yours before, probably many times. So had you. And then, in the long, slow, grinding story of prehistory, your people did something to theirs that we still do not fully understand. Around 40,000 years ago, in some places sooner, in some places later, the Neanderthals began to disappear. The last reliable dates place them in southern Iberia around 35,000 to 38,000 years ago, and after that they are gone. What happened? The honest answer is that we do not know. There are at least 4 serious hypotheses, and they probably all contributed. The first is direct competition. Climate modelers and zooarchaeologists have reconstructed the Ice Age populations at the moment of overlap, and concluded that when modern humans entered a region, large mammal populations collapsed within a few hundred years, partly because modern humans hunted the same prey more efficiently, partly because we carried new pathogens. Neanderthals, locked into a high-cost, large prey diet, had less room to pivot. This is the work of researchers like Paul Pettit and Mark White. The second is demographic swamping. There were simply a lot more modern humans. Genetic models by population biologists like Adrian Hill and Sriram Sankaraman estimate that Neanderthal populations hovered in the low thousands across their entire range at any given time, while modern humans were orders of magnitude more numerous. When the smaller population breeds into the larger one, it dissolves. This may be why Neanderthal DNA is now scattered in pieces rather than preserved in whole lineages. The third is indirect pressure through the things we did that they did not. Trade networks, longer-range alliances, more flexible diets including plants and fish, sewn clothing that fit better, projectile weapons that could be used at a safer distance than a thrusting spear. Each of these was a small advantage. Together, over 1,000 generations, they compounded. The fourth is the hardest to study, but maybe the most important. We were more like them than we like to admit. We interbred with them. Their DNA is still inside us. And one of the most cited hypotheses about Neanderthal extinction today, advanced by Rebecca Rogers Ackerman and colleagues, is that as the two populations increasingly met and mixed, the small Neanderthal gene pool was gradually absorbed rather than violently destroyed. The last pure Neanderthals may have died, but their children did not. This is the moment where the script flips. Because if you are reading this in a body that carries about 2% Neanderthal DNA, and most readers outside Africa do, then a Neanderthal did not go extinct in the deepest sense. They are sitting in your sinuses, your immune system, your hair follicles, your pain receptors. A 2016 study by Tony Capra's team at Vanderbilt found that Neanderthal DNA variants active in modern human skin and immune cells were shaped by selection after the two populations met. In some people, those variants increase the risk of lupus, depression, and certain blood clotting disorders. In others, they help fight off infections. They are not vestigial. They are part of your operating system. A 2020 study in the journal Current Biology used UK biobank data from hundreds of thousands of people and showed that Neanderthal DNA still affects how sensitive you are to pain, how your keratin keeps your skin and hair together, and even how often you sunbathe. Some of the sun-seeking behavior in modern Europeans traces back to Neanderthal variants that may have helped synthesize vitamin D in low-light environments. You are meeting Neanderthals right now, not in a cave, not on a savanna, in the architecture of your own body. The thick brow ridge you imagine when you think of a Neanderthal is not what you carry. What you carry is a set of fine-tuned genetic fragments that helped your ancestors survive the last ice age on this continent. And that still, every day, help you fight off viruses, feel pain, and absorb sunlight. The first line of this script put you at a cave mouth, looking at a stranger who almost looked like you. The closing line is the same scene, except the stranger is not standing across from you. The stranger is in you. That is what it was like to meet a Neanderthal. The meeting did not end.